I would like to talk, obviously, about stories, and I'm really excited to share this set of thoughts with you. I've been working on storytelling for quite some time. She mentioned my book, thank you. The book is called What's Your Story? And I've been spending a lot of time thinking and teaching and talking about the power of story and why stories are important. And I'd like to share with you, I would like to begin just by sort of, obviously, I'm gonna tell you a couple of stories, but I'd like to begin by talking about why I think stories are powerful and why they have an impact on people. Because I think in fundraising, in selling, in entrepreneurship, in building businesses of any kind, stories are incredibly important. In fact, I may say some provocative things this morning. I hope I do, some controversial things. And the first one I'll say is, they are your most powerful tool. Now, it's easy for me to stand up here and just say that, but I'm going to try to build a case for you to try to convince you that your stories that you share to people in different contexts, in different situations, are your most powerful tool. So, of course, I can't do a talk about storytelling without sharing a couple stories, right? Okay, so here we go. So the first story, I'm gonna actually talk about the types of stories that you tell, because I believe there are lots of different types of stories, but in my book, I characterize them in 4 different categories. You may agree or disagree with my categorization, and that's absolutely fine. And by the way, at the end, we're gonna get to some questions. So I'd love to have some questions. If I say some provocative things you don't agree with, you will please let me know and we will talk about it. One of the things I've learned about being a professor is I have 91 students right now. So every quarter I have about 100 to 150 students. I'm only teaching one class right now, and I have 91 students. And the great thing about being a professor is you develop a thick skin because you have really smart people challenging you all the time. And I've learned to love that, and it makes me smarter. So please, if I say something controversial or you say, that doesn't work, let me know. Agreed? Everybody okay with that? Even you folks in the back? Okay. All right, and I think we've got some microphones, and we'll go from there. So this is the type of story, one of my 4 types that I call a legend. And I like to start with it just because it's kind of a fun story, but it illustrates what I believe is one of the key nuances, if you will, of stories that we're talking about today, this morning, as distinct from just storytelling in its broader sense. And it goes like this. There's a general who retires from the military. This is hundreds of years ago. He's had a very distinguished career. And as sometimes happens, those of you like me with elderly or older parents know, and sometimes what happens when people retire, he got very bored very quickly. And in his boredom, he picked up this craft, this sport of archery. And he got really good. He was a very disciplined person. He got really good, really fast at this craft, this sport of archery. And he progressed quickly from apprentice to master, and he wanted to be the guru. He wanted to be the best there ever lived because he was a very disciplined person. He couldn't quite get there, and it frustrated him. And one day he heard that there was a guru living across the ocean. Well, this being hundreds of years ago, he set out on a journey. And many months went past, and he began to know that he was getting closer and closer to this person they called the guru of archery. And one morning he woke up and he packed up his camp in the woods and he began walking. And he walked down a path like this, and he began to see arrows in the middle of targets all over the countryside on every conceivable surface. He would see them in a tree, and it'd be right in the middle of a bullseye. He would see it on an overturned wheelbarrow in a village, right in the middle of a bullseye. On a hut, everywhere. And as he journeyed that afternoon, he got closer, the woods got a little denser, and he got closer and closer, he was thinking, because he kept seeing arrows everywhere, and sure enough, late that afternoon, he came upon a barn. And the barn was riddled with arrows, all dead center, middle of the target. He knew he had found his guru. And he knocked on the door of the barn, and this little old man's voice answered. He said, "Come in," this kind old man. And the general very respectfully walked in, and he saw this little old man sitting at a table with a quiver of arrows pushed up against his chair. And he said, "Sir, are you the person that put all these arrows in the middle of all these targets that I see all over the countryside?" And the little old man said, "Indeed I am." And the general said, I am very relieved to have found you. See, I've journeyed many miles, many months to find you. I'm an archer too. And I've gotten very good, but I can't reach your level. And the old man sort of looked at him curiously, and the general said, "Would you teach me how to do this? Would you teach me how to get to your level?" And the old man said, "Of course, I'd be happy to." And the general said, I'm very relieved. I've come a long way, so thank you." And the old man is looking at him very oddly, and he says, "I'm happy to teach you, but it'll only take a minute." And the general says, now the general's confused. He says, how could that be? The old man says, "Come with me." So he bends over carefully, picks up his quiver of arrows, and he walks out to the barn and finds the rare spot on the barn that's not covered with an arrow in the middle of the target. And he carefully pulls an arrow out of the quiver and lays it down. He goes up to the barn and sticks it in the barn, and he picks up a can of red paint. He paints a target around it. Now, I told you, I warned you it was a crazy story. And it's a legend being teaching stories that come from our past. But I think it illustrates a serious point. What we're talking about today is you having that metaphorical quiver on your back at all times. We're not talking about storytelling just for storytelling's sake, to entertain us. And of course, that's a wonderful value and a very distinct way to use stories. I'm actually talking about it in a much different context. I'm talking about you equipping yourselves with the right stories for the right reasons at the right times, such that you can say, "I'm going to take the red one, or I'm going to take the blue one or the green one, and I'm going to walk in and stick it in the target. Because I know that target, and I know what he or she wants, and I need to convince them that what I'm doing, fundraising, selling, building a business, whatever it may be, I need to give them context and let them into what I'm doing." And so I think storytelling is what we're talking about in that context, is having that quiver of arrows on your back. Now, the question you may be thinking is, okay, well, we're all storytellers, because we are. That's the good news about this. Human beings are storytellers. Before there was written language, there were stories. Before anything was written down, there were stories. So you're all naturals. That's the great news. The other news is, do you have the stories? Are you ready? Do you have them when you walk into a meeting one-on-one? Do you have them when you walk into a meeting one-on-many, one to a group? Are you equipping yourselves with the right stories at the right time? That's what we'll look at. Sound good? Okay. Let's start with the problem. I like we'll quickly dash through this. I like to set up the problem because I sort of see it in an interesting way. I think in an interesting way. I don't know if you can read this, but let me just tell you, this is you. This is me, this is us at the middle, any person, right? And we are equipped with all these sources of information. So this says, where do you get information? It's got books, magazines, television, etc., cell phone, web, email. You know where you get information, right? You're awash, we are awash in information. More comes at us all the time, every single day, right? And I believe that can be a problem. And I think it's best illustrated by this next slide. This is you, this is your mom. This is where your mom got information. Books, magazines, telephone, television, radio, and mail, the post. But what's happening here, right? This is you, this is your mom. Now, your mom, what did she lack? What did she not have? Internet, and all the things that have come from it. Here's what's funny about this slide. This was from my book. It's already drastically wrong. It's only 4 or 5 years old. It's already out of date, which I love to use it still, because on your right side, you've got the web, you've got email, your iPhone, whatever it may be. What's missing from the right side? Facebook, I heard them, Twitter, any form of social media, LinkedIn, all these things that have taken over our world. And one of the ways, and they've taken over some of the ways that we share information. This thing is already old and it's new. There's the problem. This right side is longer and longer. Now, this begs a couple of interesting questions. What do you get to give up when you start checking Facebook or using LinkedIn or tweeting? I'm tweeting, I don't really know why, but I do it because my students and my company tells me to do it. I don't know why anyone would care what I say in 140 characters or less, but I'm doing it. But once you start tweeting or checking Facebook, what do you get to give up here? What do you think? Nothing. You don't give up any of these things. You don't stop reading books. Okay, maybe you read them on your iPad. I understand that. I do that too. And by the way, this is not anti-technology. I love technology. I love that stuff. I teach entrepreneurship, for gosh sakes. I love technology. But the problem is, we don't get rid of anything. So what do you give up? Time. I think that's right. I think you give up time, and I think to some degree, you give up this. You give up human-to-human interaction. So the question I'm asking, and again, nothing against technology. I love all this stuff. I use it. I love to learn it. The question is, how do you make each and every interaction you have as rich as you possibly can? Because I do think we tend to use technology and all the information that we have to slice and parse things in more and more finer grains, and I'm not sure that's great. I think that's a problem when we're trying to communicate and make meaning for people, which I think is what we're all trying to do. So let's look at this. So sometimes you feel like this person. What's missing from this picture? Now, I cut it the way I wanted to cut it, so I did this deliberately. What's missing besides the pilot? Obviously a massive oversight. There's no pilot in this plane. What else is missing? The chair? No, the chair is there, I think. The person, I think the stick on the right is the steering wheel, if you will. I don't know anything about flying planes. It's the windshield. One of the things that I want to do with you is just have you think for a moment. One of the things that stories do is they pick up our heads so we can look at each other. And I don't mean you always have to be face-to-face. Stories work in any format. But they make us look in the eye, look out the windshield, see where we're going, get context. And I think one of the things that we do when we array all these devices and all these information sources around us, we can fall into that trap of just interacting through those things, through that mediated form of technology. And I think that can spell trouble. Because I think what we do is we end up making things more and more simple and stripping away all of the necessary context so people can understand the bigger picture of what we're doing. So let's look at that. This is my most labor-intensive slide. So I will just read it out loud. This is from one of my favorite people, a woman named Annette Simmons, who researches stories and she does she combines that with some of the brain science that we're starting to understand about how human beings process information. And she says, facts are neutral until human beings add their own meaning to those facts. The meaning they add to those facts depends on their current story. People stick with their story even when presented with facts that don't fit. They simply interpret or discount the facts to fit their story. This is why facts are not terribly useful in influencing others. My favorite word, influence. People don't need new facts. They need a new story. Now, I promised you that I would be provocative. This is provocative, is it not? Who agrees with this statement? Raise your hand if you agree with this statement. Who disagrees with this statement? Okay, a lot more agree than disagree. Why is that? Why is this true? Because we experience it. Say more. What does that mean? So you experience it. What does that mean? You live it, right? Is it not true that we can all line up facts to fit our argument, no matter what those facts are? But think about this, folks. I mean, facts are facts. They're the objective truth. I teach at a business school, for gosh sakes. We care a lot about facts. But what I love about this quote, and that's why I make you work for it, right? Because you have to read this whole long paragraph, is this word influence. I think we're all in the business of influence. Because that's all you have as a business person at the end of the day is your ability to influence people, your ability to have impact, your ability to make meaning for people, and to draw them towards you and your objectives. That's all you have. And again, I believe that facts are important. I don't for a minute say that the objective truth is not important. Of course it is. But what we're learning is you can line up facts to suit any cause you want. And that person that you're interacting with is doing the same thing. And so if your facts, the way you line them up is conflicting with each other, you're not having any influence. And by the way, I'm not saying that stories are the tool or the only tool. They're a tool, and they need to be used properly. But here's some interesting research that I think you'll enjoy out of Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Two man and a woman, two researchers, went into the student cafeteria, undergrad, the undergrad college, and they said, hey, folks, we'd like to ask you about, do a survey about your uses of technology. And for your trouble, it'll take 10, 12 minutes. For your trouble, we'll give you $5, $5 US. These being young people, $5, buy a cup of coffee and a muffin or a beer or whatever. They said, sure. So they got a lot of people. So they corralled all these students. They took them into another part of the building. They administered this survey about technology. And then the students would walk out, and one would say to the next, did you give any money to Roki? And the other students, Roki, sorry, what do you, I just did that survey on technology. What are you talking about? And the student would say, did you give any money? You know, that the envelope with the $5 had a pledge form from the organization Save the Children. And it was a story about this young girl who's 9 years old, who's starving, and her name is Roki. Did you give any money to Roki? And the other student would say, that's funny, I didn't have a thing about Roki. All I had was a pledge form from Save the Children. And it talked about how there's 11 million cases of malaria. There's tons and tons of cases of waterborne illness. All these sorts of things that can be saved. And it had a pledge, Save the Children, would you please donate? And yeah, I gave some money to them. And the researchers were really clever because they gave them $5 bills, not a $5 bill, 5 $1 bills. Guess what the students, guess how much money, on average, the students gave to the fact-based pledge. 11 million cases of malaria, 7 million cases of waterborne illness, et cetera, Save the Children, please donate. How much money? Just throw it out. $1, $2, $1.14. The other students that only had Roki and then Save the Children, $5 bills. What do you think? 4, 3, you're optimists. 2, $2.38. More than double. The story got more than double the donations. Why is that? Why does that happen? It touched their emotion. That's why. Now, guess what happened? The researchers, because I know some of you are thinking this, the researchers went back in the room, did the thing again. They did the experiment all over with a slight twist. Now, one half of the group got Roki only, and one half of the group got Roki and the facts. How much we know how much this group gave, $2.38. How much did this group give? Story plus facts. 3? 141. More than just the facts, but not nearly as much as just the story. Why does that happen? I'll tell you why. The experiment is called the drop in the bucket effect. You read the story, you're compelled for exactly the reasons you suggest, it hits your emotions, and you think, I gotta help this kid. I'll give her a couple of bucks. And then the facts overwhelm you. It's called the drop in the bucket effect. And people are impacted by that. Now, please, I'm not saying, for those of you who did, those 3 of you who did raise your hand and said, no, I disagree with this, I'm not saying just use stories and the world will be a better place. I'm not saying that. Of course you have to have facts. But I think at the end of the day, if we err as people in business and in fundraising, I don't think we leave the facts behind. I just don't think it happens. But I do think we leave the stories behind. That's the problem. So I want to look at that for a second. Don't even worry about the words here. The pictures are more interesting. This is you on the left. You can tell I like stick figures because it's all I can draw. This you on the left. Here's us on the right, or your audience on the right. What happens is you have this experience on the left-hand side of this. And then you take that experience, that story, and you push it through a series of filters to get it down to its essence, the bullet points. And then I make this mistake myself. Then we go to the classroom or we go out into business and we say, here it is, bullet point 1, bullet point 2. That is decontextualizing, taking all the context away from the experience you had over here. For brevity's sake, for expediency's sake, let's just tell these people what they need to know and we're done. That's the problem. I believe the hard work, and it is hard work, folks, is to go from here back to here. This is a good exercise. I had to do this when I designed my course at the University of Chicago. I had to say, okay, of all the things that I've read and done and experienced as a person, as a business person, as a salesperson, and an entrepreneur, how do I communicate that to my students in something tight? Great exercise, great discipline. But now I have to go back and hang those stories that help them understand what I'm talking about. That's what we're talking about today. George Lakoff is a guy who does a lot of work mostly in the States around metaphors. Metaphors are stories. I have a loose definition of stories. It can be an anecdote. It is not, as you can tell by the Archer story, it's not sitting around in a room and saying, okay, how do I tell a once upon a time story? It can be anything you come across. So let's look at this solution. This is one of our famous detective novelists, Raymond Chandler. And I just love this quote, if you consider the source. Here's a guy who, if I asked all of you to write down his job description, you would probably say, well, he gets up and he invents stories. He devises stories. Raymond Chandler believed that the stories are all around us. You just have to pull them down and distill them. And I believe that fundamentally. We are not talking about the invention of stories. We're talking about just grabbing them all around you. You tell thousands of stories. You tell dozens of stories every single day. And the question is, have you thought through when to tell them in the right context? So what is a story? It's funny, I play with this definition a lot because I don't really know is the truth. And you know where I'm settling on this question? It's really the first one. If you have a character and you set that character in motion, you've got yourself a story. And for me, that's the Roki thing. That's that research was so, that when I read that research, it had a profound effect on me because I thought, yep, that's it. It's just the character that gives us as a human the ability to relate to another human being. That's absolutely key. Of course, you want some action, you want some structure, and I think with the character, you get emotion. You get that. So let's look at the two things that stories do. The two things that stories do for people is they create context, and as you said, they attach your emotions. And I'm not talking about high drama. When I coach people on telling stories, I coach executives on telling stories, one of the things I say to them is, here's the horizon. And sometimes you tell a story that goes like this, up and down the horizon. This is why we go to movies. This is why we read novels. This is why we enjoy the holidays with our family, because the stories go like this, right? All of life goes like that, right? Sometimes life goes too much like that. And that's one of my points. When I coach executives, I say, you tell a combination of stories. When you get really good at this, you tell stories that go, woo, like this, right? Yeah, positive, negative, positive, negative. That's why we go to movies. But you also tell stories that just go like this. They just add a little bit of context. It's not high drama. I'm not laughing or crying, but I'm engaged because I can feel what's going on with the person that you're communicating the story about. So you probably tell these in combination. You tell maybe one or two of these in any given interaction, and you tell a whole lot of these. But don't just leave it at the facts. I can't feel the facts. So context and emotion, when you have a character, you sort of get for free. Context you have to work for. So this is a very American slide. A hectare, an acre, how big is it? Do we have any real estate amateurs in the room or pros? So I don't know, forgive me, I don't know how big a hectare is. An acre is 43,000, we're in feet, not metric, 43,560 square feet. Now, yeah, is that what it is? 5,000 square meters? Okay, that's really good that you know that. So substitute 5,000 here. So, but what is that? What is this thing up here? It's a fact. That's a fact. It's the objective truth. 5,000 square meters is the truth. It's the objective truth, the fact. Does that tell you anything about how big a hectare is? Can you see it? No, you can't. I don't think you can. I don't think most of us can see that. We're not built that way. We're built for context. So if I told you a hectare or an acre is about the size of a soccer pitch, a football field. Nobody understands that here? The front row is telling me nobody understands that here. Okay, well there's my failed attempt at context. A soccer field, yeah, soccer pitch or a soccer field, right? So and this is a soccer field. So, but you can see it, right? And maybe you can see it, maybe you can't. That's context. But folks, we have to work for that. You got to work for that. You don't just get that for free. What I'm talking about is walking into meetings, and prior to walking into meetings and saying, who is this person? What do they know? What are my facts? And how do I bring them to life? How do I give them context? Instead of just saying it's 5,000 square meters, saying, and this is the facts plus story, hey, it's 5,000 square meters. You know what that really is? It's a soccer field, or it's a story. And it doesn't mean that you have to agree with all of my stories. It doesn't mean you have to that person has to like your stories or agree with them. But the nature of creating context gets them most often to share insights and information and data and possibly and very likely stories back to you. I work with, in conjunction with Sales Engine, I do a lot of work with sales teams and all over the world. And one of the things I often say to young sales professionals is what I learned when I worked for IBM when I was young, right out of college. And one of the things they taught me is the value of being prepared. And so just imagine this slide. It says, be prepared. You're all young salespeople, and you're going out to get donations or clients or sell computers, doesn't matter what it is. And I say to all of you, now, folks, you have to be prepared. And you think, okay, Craig, I got it. You all know what that means. It's a fact, but it doesn't do anything for you. That bullet point on a slide that says be prepared has lots of information in it, because you all know what that means. You know what I mean. I don't have to explain it. But will you do it? Will you actually go be prepared? I don't know. In fact, I don't think so. But if I say, when I joined IBM in Chicago 25 years ago now, they gave me 13 zip codes on the south side of Chicago of manufacturing companies sprinkled all over Chicago. And my job was to go sell them computers. And I went door to door. And one day, I went to a company called Cornell Forge. Anybody know what a drop forge is? Okay, a few of you know what a drop forge is. You're good. You've got the 5,000 and the drop forge. So we've got a polymath up here. So I didn't know what a drop forge was, but Cornell Forge made golf club heads. That's what they made. And they made them with a 40-ton drop forge that dropped 4 stories and would punch out these golf club heads. So I went in myself thinking I'm confident, I'm strong, and I know what I'm doing, and I'm full of facts, and I sat down with this president of the company, because way back then you could actually call on the president and get a meeting with the president. And I sat down and I spread out all my brochures, and I was looking good in my suit, and he's sitting there in overalls and a t-shirt, and I just started my thing. Started selling and telling. And about 12 minutes into this meeting, I found out what a drop forge is. And it was about 30 feet behind me through the conference room wall, and I couldn't see it. And about 12 minutes in, I'm spewing all the facts and data about IBM, and this drop forge drops 4 stories, and it just goes wham, like that. And I went, woo, up out of my chair. I thought we were under attack. I was horrified. And I said, what was that? And he said, son, that's our drop forge. You don't know what a drop forge is, do you? And I said, no. Guess what happened next? I was out on the street. And I lost a big deal, because they were a really good old IBM customer and they were ready to go to the new stuff, and I lost them that day because I wasn't prepared. Now, another sort of crazy story, true story, but I believe it has a different impact. If I'm in front of a young group of salespeople and I say, folks, be prepared, you know what that means, that's going to one level. And if I say, be prepared, you know what that means. Now, let me tell you about a personal experience I had where I failed. That was a failure of mine, personal failure. Don't do that. I do believe that you're much better off with that story because you'll remember that, perhaps, more than you'll remember, what was on slide 7. Oh yeah, be prepared. Oh yeah, I've got to go be prepared. I just don't think we're built that way as human beings. Okay. Who's been to a Japanese garden? Some of you, not many. So Japanese gardens are one of my favorite places on the earth. They are these stunningly beautiful places, and they all have a feature in common, or almost all of them. Something called a zigzag bridge that looks just like this. This is the Chicago Botanic Garden. It's actually not my favorite. Most zigzag bridges only touch at the very corners. They're very dramatic. This one overlaps a little bit for whatever reason. But a zigzag bridge is 2 pieces of granite from a mainland to an island. And in Japanese philosophy, the symbolism of the zigzag bridge is that you're standing on the mainland. That symbolizes where you are in your life. And the island symbolizes your life's ambition. And the zigzag bridge is structured such to slow you down to take in the beauty that's around you. I think stories do the same thing for us, and that is incredibly important. That we give people a chance to just sink into what's actually happening instead of just trading data all the time. And I really mean this, and some of you may be thinking, okay, Craig, look, I don't have time to slow down for a second. And I don't think that stories slow you down all that much. In fact, I think what you gain from them outweighs the 3 more seconds it takes you to tell the story in the first place. And so I just wanted to sort of share that in terms of the zigzag bridge. That's what stories do. Here's the emotional side. They're not, what we're learning from, there's so much brain science going on right now. And what we're learning from brain science is that emotions are obviously the foundation of reason. When you engage the emotion, and they can actually now begin to see this, when you engage emotion, it engages a fuller part of your brain. And that's this Carnegie Mellon research, that's what it teaches us. And again, doesn't have to be drama. The other thing, and this is back to the quiver, and that's why I start with that. This is a conscious and decision-driven process. To walk into a donor and say, I'm going to tell her this story. I'm going to tell her 1 or 2 stories in this hour interaction I have with her to try to help her engage emotionally and understand the context of what we're trying to do. I was working with the medical center in Chicago about a year ago, and they were raising funds for a building in Chicago. And they were having trouble getting sponsorships. And one of the things that we did was just a slight tweak. When we looked at the deck, at the slides that they were showing, it had all of the features of the building, the number of wings, what it would do, all this sort of stuff. And what we ended up doing is and it's so simple, but what we sat down, we ended up sitting down with them and saying, the last effort that you did, the last building you put up, or they had put up a wing on a hospital in northern Chicago. When you put up that wing, what actually happened in that wing? And they said, well, Craig, it had a research component, it had a clinical component, it had this, and this. And I said, well, in the clinical component, it obviously had patients. Can you go and talk to any of those patients and understand how the ability to be served by those people at that point in time helped them? And they said, well, sure, of course we could. And they did. And they started getting better results because they went beyond. It's so obvious, I know, to all of you, but they went beyond the facts and features. It's not about the layout of the building. It's about what happens to people inside that building. That's the key. But that's a conscious process. Okay, again, don't worry about the words. Left side is low stakes. Right side is high stakes. This is you in the middle. You have all these interactions with people. Think about your next week, think about your next month. You've got these interactions with people. Some of them are low stakes, some of them are high stakes. And here's where I think stories are really important, is the high stakes part. If you have to impact somebody, if you have to get them to make a decision, if you have to get them to change their behavior, which is asking a lot, that's a high stakes meeting. That's a high stakes interaction. You've got to take a tool that is different from the usual than you would in low stakes meetings. Low stakes meetings is, you and I are meeting for lunch next week. We just send the data back and forth, done, no problem. No need for a story, that would be overkill. But if I'm trying to influence you and change your behavior, then I've got to try something different. I was in a meeting, back to my facts quote, I had a very interesting meeting in Houston, Texas with a group of surgeons. And surgeons are scientists. They're doctors, they're scientists. And they care a lot about facts. And we got into a fairly heated discussion on my quote about facts. And I'm laughing because it was really heated. And they said, Craig, no, facts are important. And I said, I'm not saying facts are not important. They said, no, you don't understand. Let's put it to you this way. We roll you down to the operating room and we cut you open, Craig. Do you want facts or do you want stories? Do you want precision or do you want this thing? And I said, all right, so you got me there. I think I want facts. I want precision. And they said, yeah, you do. And then it dawned on me right in that moment. I said, doctors, but when you roll me out of the operating room and you roll me down to recovery room and you come down to talk to me to influence the behavior that got me into the operating room in the first place, you better bring something else. You better bring something other than a knife. And that got the discussion going. Because I never win everybody, but some of them thought, you know what, I understand the difference. That's what I'm talking about. There are different situations where facts are powerful, but you've got to work for the behavior change. And that's what we're trying to impact, most of us, in our work. We're trying to impact the behavior change. The other thing that stories do is, and I know you've all seen this in your own lives, you tell stories, people share stories back with you. And those stories cause you to get multiple perspectives. That's harder, that's a longer stretch for facts to do. That's a longer journey for facts to go because they're objective. Stories are subjective. And again, that doesn't mean you have to agree with my stories. But just in the nature of telling them, you will see different perspectives. You'll say, Craig, well, I disagree with those three things. Let's talk about that. It's like changing the perspective from the operating room to the recovery room. That's a different perspective. So you need a different tool. Okay, so I want to share with you, I talked about this metaphorical quiver, right? And I think this is sort of a two-part case I'm making. I'm trying to make a case for context and emotion and why that's important. But then, okay, that's fine. If you agree or disagree, that's okay. But then if you agree, okay, I can use these in high-stakes meetings, then how do I gather them up? How do I create that quiver on my back? And I think it looks kind of like this. So there's a couple of tools. This is a framework that I use. This is a framework that underlies all the teaching. I teach now 3 courses at the University of Chicago. I teach a course on entrepreneurial selling, one called Building the New Venture, which looks at a business at time zero, and what do you do at time zero to get a business off the ground. And I teach a course on leadership. They all have this as an underlying framework: knowledge, skills, and discipline. And so the second provocative thing that I'll say to you is, you have too much knowledge. How's that coming from a business school professor? How's that sit? You have too much knowledge. Thank you for clarifying that. And you're exactly right. So I'm being provocative for a reason. I don't mean, stop reading, stop learning. I love learning, and I love this process of trying to accumulate knowledge. What I mean by it is exactly what you said. You can be overwhelmed by it, and you can overwhelm others by it. Telling stories is a skill and a discipline. Yes, it comes from your knowledge and experience, but it's a skill, and my favorite word is discipline. Because it is making that decision to give somebody something more. It is doing the hard work that says, I'm going to figure out the context that will connect with these people, and I'm going to shape that into a story. Not a fictional story. This is not manipulation. But I'm going to go to that wing of that hospital and find a story that will impact these people. That's a discipline, not knowledge. And then telling stories is, the skill of telling stories is this. How do you combine those stories to make a point? So knowledge, skills, and discipline, but I think the most important bubbles are these ones on the right, which is fairly provocative for somebody coming from a school to say the knowledge piece is the least important. Because the knowledge bubble is usually the biggest. Look how smart I am. Look at all the facts I have. Wow. Doesn't matter. Doesn't impact anybody. Okay. So this is just another way to think about that. This is what I call the art of conversation. Normally, when we enter a conversation, we have the whole conversation at once. We say a lot. Why do we do that? Because we have tons and tons of knowledge and we want to share it. That's why we do it. And again, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I believe that we should start a conversation in a very tight circle. Let me give you an example. When someone says, what do you do? What do you usually say? Throw something out. What do you say? Well, I walk up to you at a noon reception after this, and I say, hi, I'm Craig, what do you do? What would you say? I'm a fundraiser, right? That's great. Nothing wrong with that. It's pretty tight. It's pretty small. One of the things I say to my students, we work on this conversation model over and over and over again. Because what I want them to do is I want them to be able to describe their company in one sentence. And in the first week of my course, it always shocks them when I give them the assignment and I say, I'm going to give you a very difficult assignment right at the start of this course. And they all roll their eyes, oh, right? And I say, it's to craft one sentence about your company. And I want you to videotape it and put it on YouTube so I can watch it. And they're like, is this guy crazy? He's assigning one sentence? And they all think, that wasn't hard, and they walk out. And then they realize how hard it is to craft one sentence, to get it down to one sentence. Because here's the mistake that we make, and I set you up, so I apologize. When someone asks you what you do, you say, I'm a fundraiser, or I'm a professor. Okay, that tells them exactly nothing, right? Or the mistake we make, and this is why I came to this, because I make this mistake like, oh, well, I run a company called Sales Engine, and what we do is blah, 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 blah. And 45 minutes later, you're going, oh my God, right? And you're trying to get away from me, because I'm passionate, and I have lots of knowledge about this, and lots of enthusiasm, and I'm gonna share that with you. It comes from a good place, but it's wrong. It's just wrong. So in my business Sales Engine, somebody comes up to me, and this happens every day. Someone comes up and says, Craig, what do you do? Because I've got, Craig on my shoulder. Craig, what do you do? And I say, oh, I run a company called Sales Engine. What we do is help firms build and tune their sales engine. That's an awkward pause. That's what that is. The awkward pause is inserted on purpose because I want to create a conversation, a dialogue, not a monologue. And what I want you to say, Craig, what does that mean? And then I say the next bubble, which is also very hard to come up with. Mine is people, process, and tools. I say I look at the sales process companies use, the tools they use to support their sales team, and the knowledge, skills, and discipline of the team itself. Next awkward pause. And I'll tell you it works. And we train our students to do this because we've got to this is called an on-ramp to a conversation. Because in bubbles 3 and 4, that's where the stories come. And they're hung on process, and their stories hung on tools, and their stories hung on knowledge, skills, and discipline. That's the discipline behind this model. But you have to have the stories to be able to do that. So there are the questions. I call the first one a sales trailer, which is the movie trailer of your business. People will ask you, what does that mean? How do you do this, et cetera? And now you're up into a conversation where the richness of the stories can come. Okay. Jean Piaget, the famous psychologist, back in the 1920s, I just love this. He became famous on the strength of this experiment. He took a cube and he colored half the cube red and half the cube green. And this was obviously long before computers, long before brain science. And he sat down a group of 3-year-old human beings. And he put the red side of the cube towards them. And he said, "What color do you see?" And they said, "Red." And then he turned the cube around and he said, "Now what color do you see?" And they said, "Green." And he said, "What color do I see?" And they said, "Green, not red." Why did they do that? Because they can't see through your eyes. This was a breakthrough in human brain development. Jean Piaget discovered that at 3 years old, we have not developed consciousness outside of ourselves. At 4, they say, "Red, you're seeing red." 4 years old. That was a breakthrough. What I'm talking about in storytelling is this turning of the cube, right? One of the things that we do is have to get behind people's eyes and see what they're seeing. And stories can do that. That's where the multiple perspectives come in. That's where the context comes in. When you share a story or they share one back, you're seeing a world that you wouldn't otherwise see. And that's why I love to just illustrate this with the turning of the cube. Now, I'm gonna skip this. Let me show you this. Again, the words don't matter. It's the structure that I'm after. This is a tool that we call the story matrix. And I wanna describe this to you and just talk about it for a few minutes. It's got the 4 types of stories I mentioned at the start. Along the top, you've got success, failure, fun, and legends. And then you've got all these categories down the left-hand side in rows of where you need stories. This is your quiver. This is the quiver. We call it the story matrix. And it's just a simple spreadsheet is all it is. We make it fancy on the web, but it's just a simple spreadsheet. It's enforced discipline, and it's meant to suggest you need 4 types of stories, and we're gonna talk about that. And you need them in these places to influence these types of people. And I've got the 4, right? If you agree with it, just if you go with that for now and say, "Okay, Craig, we'll do your 4 success, failure, fun, and legends." But now you have to figure out where you need stories for your own business, for your own fundraising efforts. So let me ask you a couple questions about this. If I walked in, let's just say you all agree with me that success, failure, fun, and legends are the types of stories you need. Those 4 types. And I walked in here today, or I walk out of here today and I say, "Okay, great, congratulations, you have stories now. You can only use one type in your fundraising efforts. Success, failure, fun, or legends. What would you choose?" I heard fun. So I would categorize my drop forge story, which is you can't see it, but I've got the pointer right there. It says drop forge. That's where I got that story. I pulled it right off my matrix to tell you. Now I've got it categorized as a failure story, but it also belongs over here in fun, because I can tell it as fun because it was kind of fun. It was horrifying, but it was fun. What else? Fun? Success? And you know legends now. Legends are either stories from spirituality, history, wherever you may get old teaching stories, or the other definition of legends are legends about successful business people that we all know because we all swim in the same culture. So we all know stories about Steve Jobs at Apple, for instance. We all know that story or know some of those stories. Those are legends too. You know what fun is, easy to define. You know what failure is, you know what success. Do we get no votes for failure? Failure. We get a couple votes for failure. Yes, there's some back there. Here's the thing. Go back to that crazy long quote that I showed you and this notion of influence. Which type of story is going to influence people? I think so. Failure. Somebody said failure. I know this is provocative. You don't all have to agree with this, of course. It's just my thought. I think failure stories are your most powerful. And some of you I know are sitting there going, "Are you mad? We're raising money here. We're selling something here. And I'm gonna go in and tell failure stories?" Let me just clarify. Failure stories are not, look what a moron I am stories. Failure stories are like the drop forge story, just an honest failure. I wasn't prepared. I hadn't done my homework, and something bad happened. Now, I learned from that, but look, it's a failure story. I'll give this to you in a different context. Every single week, I meet with students, and they all want to come out of Chicago booth and get a great job, of course. And Craig, can you sit down with me and just, give me a little mock interview just so I'm ready? And I love doing this. And I really love doing it because I always ask the same question, because I know the interviewers are going to ask the same question. Tell me about a time you had a failure. And it's so interesting when you ask a really smart, young, up-and-coming MBA student to tell you about a failure, because they all do it the exact same way. I see this every week. They say, well, good question. I ran a project a few years ago for a consulting firm I was working for, and I mismanaged the budget a little bit, and I didn't have the right people, and the client was really getting upset, and the wheels were starting to come off. But at the last second, I made a set of decisions and saved it. Boy, I learned a lot. Can feel it. I swear it happens the same way every time. And I say, okay, wow, that's a good story. Now tell me a failure story. And I do that, and I do it just like that, because I'm a little bit mean with my students, because I'm trying to make a point. And I say, guys, that was a success story, not a failure story. And they say, Craig, come on, I'm trying to get a job at McKinsey, at Bain Capital, at Goldman Sachs. Come on, help me here. And I say, guys, let me put it to you this way. And this is why I strongly believe, that our failure stories are our most powerful stories. I say to my students, let me put it to you this way. I go in right before you go in, and I'm interviewing with Goldman Sachs. And I tell Craig saves the world at the end of at the end of the day. And then you walk in, and they say, Susan, tell me a story. And you tell the exact same story, but right before the end, you say, you know what? The thing was I mismanaged it. I had the wrong people. The wheels came off. The client was unhappy. And you know what? I learned a lot, but I own that. It was a failure. End of story. That has a fundamentally different impact on this person from Goldman Sachs than I do, trying to make myself look great all the time and trying to answer your failure question with a success. It's disingenuous at best. And I believe that you, Susan, in my hypothetical, would have a much better impact on that person, because they're looking for a person that knows their stuff, that is confident, who is real, and who can learn from their mistakes, but can admit when they've screwed up. And I believe that person's going to get that job every single time. Another way to think about it is, if I walked in here today, or any of you came up here on the stage today, and I came in and I told you the 5 greatest hit success stories of Craig, what would you think about me after about 3 seconds? Horrified. You'd be horrified. Arrogant, idiot, full of himself, and words we won't say out loud. Now, I understand that the converse is also true. If I walked in here and walked up on stage and said, hi, I'm Craig, and told you the 5 tragic failure stories of Craig, which I have plenty, you'd be horrified, thinking, okay, why are we here again? And you'd be looking at your schedules. I understand that. But here's the difference. You would listen all the way through my 5 failure stories. I know you would. It would be drawn to a train wreck, but you'd be drawn to it. If I told you a success story and then I launched into another one, you'd be gone. Mentally or physically, you're gone. People, we relate to failures because we can understand the context and we can feel them. And that's why they're important. Again, I'm breaking my own rule, because the rule is, or the tool suggests, that you should have all 4 types and you tell them in combination. But if you err with your failure stories. But you have to have them. You got to have the failure stories to do this. And I will tell you, and you know this already, they are all around you. what I hope that what happens today as you walk out of here is that as you go through the next day or the next week, you're conscious of the stories that are playing out around you. One of my colleagues who I teach this leadership program with, she is a phenomenal person and a phenomenal professor named Linda Ginzel out of University of Chicago. She said something, when I first met her, I was watching her teach an audience of executives, and she got very heavy-handed about this, and I just loved her when she said, if you don't write it down, it doesn't exist. So write down what I'm about to say to you. And it was in front of a bunch of very senior executives, and I'm in the back of the room going, wow, this woman's got strength. And sure enough, they did. And she's a social psychologist, and she believes that. And I fell in love with her, watching her say that to these people. And I thought, you know what, that's right. That's exactly right. And so my ask of you is that as you see these stories, take a few of them and write them down. And reflect on your own successes and failures and write a few of those down. Of course, you're not gonna write down every story. You know, we go upstairs and grab coffee and there's something happens and that's a story. You're not gonna write down everything that happens to you. But write down the good ones because then you've got this tool. I literally use this tool. Before I teach a leadership program, before the very day that I'm gonna teach, it's a 4-day program, day one, very early in the morning, I sit down with this tool and I go, that one, and that one. Because what I've done is I've looked at the audience that's gonna be there and I say, you know, I would have told that one, but not for this audience. That one, and this one. That's how you use this tool. That's the consciousness and the decision making that's going on with this metaphorical quiver that you're pulling arrows out of. Does that make sense? All right, questions?